Okay, so I announced the bingo. Is it a crime?
Eddie, what do you want to do?
You've asked me that question for a year.
But you haven't answered for a year.
I want to write the Maltese Falcon, I want to record Blue Suede Shoes, and I want to play Las Vegas.
They've done the first two.
That's the rumor.
Eddie,
What?
do you know what?
What?
You're a bloody nut.
I owe it all to you, Doc.
What's this?
I'm advertising.
How long have I been lying here, though? A week? Can't think. Mum called me balmy when I told her I fell off a gasometer for a bet. But I'm not balmy. I'm a fighting pit prop that wants a pint of beer, that's me. But if any knowing bastard says that's me, I'll tell him I'm a dynamite dealer waiting to blow the factory to kingdom come. I'm me and nobody else. Whatever people say I am, that's what I'm not. Because they don't know a bloody thing about me.
Hi, and welcome to Ward 13. Ward 13 goes to the movies. We have a special request tonight, and Jim is going to read one of the great poems of the 20th century.
From a fellow countryman of mine.
Yes.
No other than William Butler Yeats. So this is The Second Coming, and John has asked me to read it because of my Irish tone, I guess. So, and it's in honor. Is it in honor of somebody?
Yes, but we're not going to mention.
Oh, we're not? Okay.
We don't want to humiliate anybody by associating with Ward 13 other than you, Jim.
Okay, so yeah, I'll be humiliated enough. So, The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming? Hardly are those words out, when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow ties, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
Well, if anybody's still watching from your show, can you pass that over?
I can.
Because you're going to read it again at the end.
All right.
After the run-through.
W.B. Yeats.
I think that, every generation, this was during the Irish Civil War, I find. After,
I love his line. All is changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. That's what he talked about at the dawn of Irish independence.
Yes. But of course, probably the most famous part, to say the most famous part of this poem is the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passion and intensity.
Yeah,
Some things
right.
never change. Huh?
Yeah, well, this is the beauty of poetry, right? Especially poetry written by someone like W.B. Yeats. Genius. I mean, you can read these poems and read them again and again, and there's meaning within meaning. People teach courses on the thing, right? On individual poems, and it's wonderful stuff. I have a lot of books at home, but I have a collection of poetry, and some of it is used more often than other parts are. But I have a compendium of the works of W.B. Yeats, and that's pretty dog-eared.
Yes, I have mine.
Yeah, and as much as I go back to it, and I wish I could. I can remember individual lines. The Be Loud Glade and all but the Ballad of Wandering Angus.
How can you tell the dancer from the dance? That's from Among School Children.
Yeah.
I used to be able to recite parts of it. Now it comes down to like one line or a fragment.
There was a time when I was a kid in school in Ireland, we used to have to learn off 10 lines of poetry every single night. Learn it off, and this was probably in halfway through high school, like that kind of time, like 14 or 15. You had to learn 10 lines of poetry, and sometimes Shakespeare, whatever it happened to be. You had to learn 10 lines Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night. And then on Friday, you had to be able to repeat all 40 lines. And sometimes it was a little more, sometimes a little less. But every morning when you came into school, the first thing you did in English class was you had to write the 10 lines. And if you made more than 3 mistakes, you were sent out to the line where you got a cane. So because
you were caned?
Yeah, all the time. We got caned more days than we didn't get caned. Actually, the days we didn't get caned, we thought there was something wrong with us. That's a slight exaggeration. But honestly, this was a particularly intense guy. But and a mistake.
Is this the Christian Brothers School in Ireland, or
this
are you in England?
This was Presentation Brothers. They were like the provisional wing of the Christian Brothers.
Oh, okay.
But the Presentation, wonderful teachers, wonderful men. But they were different times. But a mistake, it wasn't just knowing the words. If you had a spelling mistake, so 3 mistakes in the line. So you had to have every one word. I sweat blood learning those things because you had to learn them. Also, the punctuation had to be perfect. If you put a comma instead of a semicolon, that was a mistake.
Well, you were being taught how to. Everybody says about that type of classical education to think, but it was really how to communicate and how to write. Because when you had all those models, my father refused to take the college course back in 1941 because why would I take the college course? I'm not going to college. So they had the commercial course. He had their, and I have his school books in West High of the time, Racine, all the French plays.
Right.
He had to know French, Latin for
Really?
the commercial course.
Wow.
But it's, you learn how to communicate and how to talk.
Right. Well, I don't know.
Speak.
Yeah,
rhetoric.
speak.
How to use rhetoric.
And then in elocution was a thing. We had to be able to enunciate properly. You could get into trouble for that too.
That could help.
And I don't know whether these things are good. And some people are married to these, the good old days, and that was when people really learned, which I call foul to all of that. It's mostly, however, I'm the product of it myself. Its advantage is that you certainly end up with a body, if that's what you are into and are able to manage it, you end up with this body of knowledge that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And then you can use it.
But you can communicate with a vast group of people because then you're learning French. Pasternak, who was fluent in English, translated Shakespeare, it's quite beautiful. His Shakespeare.
People in the early 20th century, for sure.
They
people
could
like
communicate
James Joyce,
with
Ulysses,
each other.
They were all multilingual, though.
Oh, geez, he was a genius.
Right. So, but
Italian,
French, Italian,
everything,
German.
Yeah.
They would use, and sort of the British aristocracy. It was a thing, right? To sort of people. Well, the Queen's husband was German, right? So it's like they were able to switch back and forth in languages. So you learn these languages. Then in the earlier time, of course, people learned Latin and Greek, and a lot of it came from the Latin. Everybody had to learn Latin.
Because you learn the Latin roots.
Yes.
Then you know the key to language and Greek, but Greek
when I
not
was
so
in
much
high,
when we were
when I was in
kids.
high school in
I learned
Ireland in the 1970s, you had to have Latin. Listen to this is true.
Yeah.
You had to have Latin in order to go to university. So if you didn't take Latin in high school, you couldn't go to university. It didn't matter if you were studying geometry. Latin was a requirement.
Right.
So every kid took Latin, or every kid who was going on to third level education. You had to take Latin. Now it was about
Look at Oxbridge.
I'd
Latin,
have to check the year, but I bet that was it was changed while I was in high school. So I bet that was changed in like 1973 or something. They did away with the Latin requirement. It might have been 72, 73, 74. That was the year that you no longer had to do Latin. So again, most people still did it, but that was a requirement. Now, of course, it worked great for people doing biology, people doing medicine.
But if you wanted to be a writer too, it's like a keys to the kingdom, Latin,
Right.
and how to build language, how to build sentences,
understanding structure,
and then
declension,
Greek
and,
too, because
yes.
because you can use. English is amazing in that you can use so many different words because you have the French influence, you've got the Germanic influence,
Right.
Frisian, whatever you want to call it. But then you can go to Greek and Latin where it's to micturate rather than urinate, and then you can
Right.
go to just plain old PISS.
Right,
something like that with its
the vernacular.
sibilants.
Yeah.
And-
And I was always challenged by
Which
Greek, and we never.
somebody like Joyce would,
Oh my
like an
God.
organ, he'd go
Yeah,
through
yeah,
everything.
yeah. Well, then it's the meaning, and so what happens is that when somebody says a word, it isn't just a word; it's all that connected meaning. So there could be there's a
Of
deeper level of
course.
conversation because the word carries more than just the individual. You know,
When somebody says to you, of a local politician here, that person's a real Julian Sorrell. Well,
Right.
you know, that's Stendhal, the black and the white, and you know what it means. But that person told me this is almost like in his 70s, and I had the real, it took me a while to dredge
work
that
right,
back
right,
up
right.
because it was so, I'd read it in my 20s because you had to read the.
There was another. We all have our favorites or teachers who influenced us particularly, but I had this presentation brother, who and actually an amazing man, but for a story for another day. But he was a Shakespearean scholar.
Which is where we're going to get into,
And he would walk around, and he could converse using Shakespeare. I mean, every word out of his mouth was a line. When I speak, let no dog bark. He would just instead of just saying be quiet. Anyway. So.
John Silber, who was the president of BU, used to do that, but then he would get the things wrong. So you're 20 years old.
Yeah.
Let's see if you got the guts to call him out on that.
Who surprised me in that regard was Bulger, who was
Billy Bulger. That was part of his affectation.
But
Not Whitey. Whitey Bulger's brother.
Whitey Bulger's brother, who
Yeah.
wrote the book. He wrote about his time. But when I read his biography, I took him as a typical Paul. And I don't know much about him,
Right.
really, whether he was corrupt or not, whether he was good or not. He ended up being
He
dean
was
of
corrupt.
Boston University,
and,
was it, or BC? Was it BU?
No,
I
the
think?
whole UMass.
UMass, yeah. So I don't know, but I remember reading his biography, which I didn't pay an awful lot of attention to, other than the fact that he was an educated man. And,
Right, but it was affectation with him in a bit
Was it?
but he's trying to prove when you come out of Southie that he is educated.
well, he went to Boston Latin, right? Didn't he?
Right, which is an excellent school.
Yeah,
Cambridge
yeah.
Latin's an excellent school too.
Yeah.
But,
So anyway, we were going to talk.
we're going to talk. Albert Finney died,
Albert Finney.
and Paul, if we have a few things that we can do, I think B is the background. Ward 13 goes to the movies, but we also got the video. If you got a chance, we'll see the video D.
Video D. Which one is that? We'll have a look and
Tom.
see.
You out there, Paul? Oh, here we go.
We
All right.
are all of us as God made
Albert.
us, and many of us much worse. Tom Jones was much, much, much worse. The whole world loves Tom Jones.
I shall always hate and despise.
Keep talking. We'll see what happened.
That's your video.
Yeah.
It died just like that?
It's still playing.
How come it's stuck?
I don't know.
Hey, let's try that. We'll try N. We have a backup Tom Jones video. Yeah, I guess they've got to be loaded up properly.
Which number do you want me to play?
N.
N for nanny.
What one?
All the way down there, N.
N.
N? Okay.
Yeah, for Nancy, France. No, no, no.
No. Yeah. So Albert Finney. Most people, I think.
Can they hear us, Paul?
Yeah, you're talking.
Okay, Albert Finney.
See, I'm going to come back to you on screen. There's some kind of issue with
Yeah,
the
there's a
video.
glitch. Albert Finney was, who just recently died.
Died this week.
What's the role that he turned down that made a fellow fellow countryman famous?
Yes, Peter O'Toole in the Desert Fox, or not
No.
the Desert Fox. In
Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia. Yeah.
David
yeah.
Lean.
Yeah.
They originally were going to sign him. They did 100,000 pounds worth of tests in color in that, and David Lean. Finney years later said he was a very cold director, and Lean thought he was too young. He didn't have the experience,
Right.
but he was more physically like Lawrence, T.E.
Lawrence, yeah,
Lawrence,
T.E.
and
Lawrence,
T.E.
right,
Lawrence's brother, who owned the rights to and sold them,
Right.
and had some power over it. Because Brando was the original choice, because
Right.
it was Sam Spiegel who produced On the Waterfront, which won him his
course.
first Best Picture Oscar with Elia Kazan, and Brando won the Oscar, and he loved Marlon Brando, and he wanted Brando for the role. But Brando said, I'm not going to ride around on a camel for 2 years, and there's an F-bomb in there, too.
Yeah.
So then he makes Mutiny on the Bounty for 2 years, which ruins his career, but that's...
Right.
He had a great time.
Oh, they're
So,
all great movies, though, right?
Albert Finney, they said, here's a 5-year contract, and he just walked out on it. And so the last choice of all was the best choice,
Peter
because
O'Toole.
he might not be the Lawrence of Arabia, because Lawrence of Arabia was about my height, about 5'4".
Right,
And
right.
Peter O'Toole was 6'2", but he was born to play that Lawrence.
And
He's
if you
brilliant
if
in
you
that
and the
role.
movie's a great movie,
Oh,
because it's a,
I would say it's one of the
great-
arguably the greatest
right.
movie. You could argue that's the greatest.
And when you think
movie.
about all that stuff was done without
Spielberg loves it,
without it was done without
it's all
computer.
practical.
Yes. But the actual cinematography, there's no computer animation
Freddie
and all
Young.
those extras and everything. I mean, they're incredible. Those desert scenes and the battle scenes and everything.
Took a year and a half to film that
Yeah.
in Jordan and places,
But
and they had to pretend Sam Spiegel wasn't Jewish.
Oh, really? Yeah.
They wouldn't allow him in Jordan if they.
I mean,
was.
it's a little. I guess if one looks at it from the viewpoint of sort of an Arab person today, it's a little, it's a little tainted that way. But the story of T.E. Lawrence himself is
Well,
a
that's
wonderful
another.
story. That's a different
You
story.
can come on and talk about that. The point was, Albert Finney turned that role down, but he
Right.
made Saturday Night and Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, which is one of the. That's
Video's all set if you want to go back to it.
okay. No, we'll go to that one in a second. How about if you can get picture F up? It's Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. It's Arthur Seaton, which is one of the great books. I read that when I was a kid.
Right.
But it's working class literature. Suddenly, in the wake of John Osborne wrote the great play, Look
Right.
Back in Anger,
Anger.
which they made a movie. Cubby brought, no, it's Saltzman, the James Bond. There he is as a Seaton.
Wow.
Alfred
He
Seaton,
was a handsome
the
guy, wasn't he,
character.
back in the day? You
He
can see that
just looks
working
like a
class
bloke
look
to
him.
me, but
Just like an average guy. That's what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But he was from near Manchester, Salford, but he's
Salford,
you
England,
can't
yeah,
talk
yeah.
to him as a Mancunian.
You're right.
And his father was a bookmaker, but he was one of the first working class. He's the first working class star, and then he was followed by Alan Bates and Tom Courtney. Who I saw Tom Courtney on stage. Which,
Really?
That guy's an
When
artist.
was this? Like, how long ago was that? That's like 1950s, right? 1960s? Like, how long ago was that?
Well, Albert Finney started out, he was born in 1936. He went to RADA, the Royal Academy of
Yeah,
Dramatic Art.
yeah.
And Charles Lawton discovered him. And he
Wild, isn't it?
understudied Laurence Olivier in Coriolanus, the 1959 version. It's very famous, where Olivier saw Jack Barrymore as a kid,
Right.
leaping around
Yep.
as Hamlet, and that's how he created his Hamlet. And so for Coriolanus, as he's being killed at the end, he wanted to be like Mussolini, because when Olivier played Coriolanus in 1938, it was like, oh, he's the nobleman against the mass. And then after everybody goes through World War II, he's a fascist.
Yes, right.
So he wanted him to die like Mussolini, upside down. So Olivier, as he's dying, would fall all off this. They had a construction on the stage, and he'd
Right.
fall down, and they'd have to grab him. one night, he
didn't
breaks
grab
his ankle, and Albert Finney fills in and becomes a star on the stage.
Right.
And he was the first actor, that great revolution of working class actors, because when John Osborne wrote Look Back in Anger, it's a famous story because it was so controversial. That's about 55 or 56. Arthur Miller was in England, and he liked Laurence Olivier because they were making that movie with Marilyn Monroe. I can't remember what it's called. Oh, The Prince and the Prince and the Showgirl, right?
I don't
Which
know
was
that
Terrence Rattigan,
Yeah.
which is upper, tough, upper class stuff, a comedy. But Olivier didn't like the play, but Miller went with him. He said, well, this is great. And Olivier's genius was that he was able to adapt. And then he went to Osborne. Osborne wrote The Entertainer for him, which is one of the greatest roles he's
right.
on stage. And he also
Yeah.
got an Oscar nomination of a broke-down, third-rate comedian, a music hall comedian, which is a thing. But so Osborne, the introduction of the working-class consciousness onto the stage, which Olivier shepherded that, just like with the National Theater, he shepherded a whole new generation of actors, like Anthony Hopkins and
really?
Glenda Jackson,
Wow.
Redgrave, Vanessa Redgrave, and the National
You know,
Theater.
and I didn't know
Derek
that.
Jacobi, all of them.
But I think
Alan
about
Bates.
I was reading something on George Bernard Shaw the other day, and Pygmalion, and of course the connection with Albert Finney is, of course, Albert Finney played in My Fair Lady.
No, he didn't.
Yes, he did.
You think that's Rex Harrison, and then later, I think, on stage, many years later, O'Toole did. You're
I'm
mixing
almost
them up.
certain.
No, Albert Finney.
He didn't
no.
do My Fair Lady.
No. Well, it's
All right.
Rex Harrison was on
Well,
stage.
Rex
You're talking
Harrison
about
on the movie. Rex Harrison's on the
Pygmalion's
movie.
the non-musical.
Right, yeah. Maybe it
That was
Pygmalion.
originally-
Because I know, because I was making the connection,
Well,
and now
let's
the
see.
connection's broken. We could look that up. I'm almost certain.
I think Peter O'Toole played it. Well, you go at yours.
Yeah, I'm good.
But the important thing was, they were the people they were from the North.
Right.
They were from the North, and all of a sudden you get this injection of a working class culture,
Right.
and the Beatles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you got the whole
Are
like
from
for
the
people
north,
for
you know,
people who
northern
aren't for
songs.
people who aren't
Liverpool.
familiar, right? Liverpool, Manchester, those were the shipyards, the working class
Right.
areas, big right next to Sheffield, the big steel manufacturing places
With the
and
red brick universities of
yes,
the Victorian,
exactly.
but you're not Oxbridge with the right accent.
And right up until when you listen to the BBC and the newsreel and all that stuff, they had those sort of very British accents. And of
Right.
course, even I'm saying British accents, but of course, somebody from Manchester, their accent is as genuinely, perhaps more genuinely British than somebody from London is. They're all equally British.
Well, if you ever hear the Beatles, like in the early days, talking when they're not putting on the accent, you can barely understand
you don't know what they're
them.
saying.
That's Lancashire. That's
Um,
where my great-grandfather's from.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, Lancashire.
I was going to the reason just to go back to the reason I was going back to when you talked about Redgrave and
Vanessa Redgrave
and all
came from
those.
an
I was
actor.
going to tie in with because the George I wasn't aware that George Bernard Shaw, that is I was going to mention a minute ago, was actually one of the founding members of what was originally New Labour, now the Labour Party in Britain.
Yeah, he was one of the.
He was one of the first, he was part of the and then his writings.
We're having some trouble with the Fabian Society.
the Fabian Society,
Right.
correct?
He helped found Labour.
He did, and I didn't. I'm just looking up.
You see, at the time in the 50s, Olivier was considered like the height of an establishment actor,
Right.
hobnob with everybody. But he adapted where Gielgud and the other great actor, what's his name? It was a great friend of Olivier. Ralph Richardson.
I've
It
just,
took them years to get into contemporary
It says, I
plays.
just found something here. So the other thing that people will remember, Albert Finney, of course, an American audience will be Aaron Brockovich.
Right, that
Much
was his
different.
last Oscar nomination.
But anyway, he is known for his roles in Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, 90s. Tom
which was a
Jones.
great, they called them kitchen sink dramas.
Right, Two for the Road, and by the way,
for the Road's a great
some of
movie.
those movies were actually banned by the censor in England because they were too raucous or raunchy. They would never be banned here. But
Trelwalian or whatever it was, the censor.
And then Scrooge, 1970, Annie, The Dresser, Miller's Crossing. I have to go to the next one. The next one is A Man of No Importance.
Oh, that's an excellent movie. He plays the Irish bus.
So I was in a play in Manchester. I played a part in The Man of No Importance.
Are you talking about the original Wilde play or this? This wasn't a play. This was a movie.
No, this is a movie. But the
Oh, you know, A Man of No Importance. Have you seen the movie?
No, I've
He's
not
a
seen
bus
the movie.
conductor that is a gay.
Yeah, I played the part, and there's a scene in if anybody ever finds this on Facebook, it was on Facebook. There's a scene in the movie. It's a bus conductor who's coming out. He's gay, and he's coming out. And there's a scene in the movie. And there's a scene in the play
In the 60s.
Yeah,
in
where
Dublin.
there's a scene in the play where he kind of lets it slip to some of his buddies. He decides to sort of go out and be seen, and he comes out a little bit, and his buddies immediately they reject him, and he's a guy in his 40s who's been dealing with this crisis his whole life, or rising crisis all his life, and he comes to his own self-realization, and he goes, anyway, there's a scene on the stage where these buddies of his, they're all drinking in the bar, and he comes out, and they take him outside, and they
beat him.
They beat the crap out of him.
Yeah.
So when you're in acting, right, you get taught how to do fight scenes and all that stuff. So I took it all to heart. So I'm one of the guys beating him up. So I've got a beer in my hand. I put the beer down, and I've got my shirt that's kind of half torn, and I have a flat cap on, and I'm kicking this guy on the stage, right? And somebody took a photograph of it, the night of the play, and they put it on Facebook. But they didn't put on Facebook. They said great job last night, Jim, or something, and then people are like, what the hell were you doing? And I was like trying to type as fast as I could. It's a play, it's not really me. But anyway, A Man of No Importance. And the other thing I remember about that play in Manchester was when we did the play in Manchester was all the other actors we had a speech therapist or a speech coach come in to teach them all the Dublin accent. And of course I got to sit around for hours, when you're on a play and everybody's learning. I could sit in the side just laugh at them because, normally it was the other way around. I had to learn whatever. We're doing something from Virginia, and I had to learn that. This time they
What's funny is I had a friend that was in the Birmingham Rep, and she's from California, so she's playing Blanche Dubois, and the English have to learn how to do the accent, which in New Orleans is basically a variation. It sounds a lot like a Brooklyn accent because they've got their own unique accent. Right. And they said, with you, it's no big deal. Yeah, no, a California accent is not a New Orleans accent.
There's a couple of others here, John, that I had forgotten, and they sort of from there was the Bourne movies.
He was in the Bourne movies.
He was. He was one of the guys. He was one of the corrupt guys who was. I
don't watch stuff like that.
Yeah, but people, people watching will remember it. So he was in the Bourne Ultimatum, and he was in the Bourne Legacy, but I don't remember this, but he was in Skyfall.
Yeah, he's at the very end. That was his last movie role.
What does he do in Skyfall?
He says he's the groundskeeper at the family manse.
Is that him?
Yeah, it's just a cameo.
Yeah.
That's because. Harry Saltzman and them, he knew all those people. He probably knew Cubby Broccoli's family, who.
So he was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actor.
Times.
It says here 4, but this is only
5
Wikipedia.
Best Actor.
So it says Tom Jones, Murder on the Orient Express.
Right.
I'd forgotten that.
Which is much. Yeah.
Yeah. The Dresser. I don't know The Dresser.
You've never seen The Dresser?
No.
Well, that's with Tom Courtney too.
And Under the Volcano, 1984. He was also nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Yeah, so Best
Aaron
Actor for Aaron Brockovich. His performance as Winston Churchill in the HBO BBC
Won the
television
Emmy.
play, the Academy saw him receive numerous accolades. Wow.
Well, the point is
Just another one of the greats, right? I think back to, you talk about Gielgud and all those guys, like from the British side, and Peter O'Toole and Richard Harris, and like all those, they're all gone.
I want to show. I'd like to do this sport. So he turned down the role well, could have made him a superstar. So he
Well, it
did,
made Peter O'Toole a superstar. What else
Right.
did Peter O'Toole do? That was probably the
but
thing he's most
he didn't
remembered
even
for.
care because he was asked about it years later. He didn't care.
Yeah.
He didn't want to have a 5-year contract. But Tom Jones was
Yeah.
1963. It was Osborne's company, John Osborne, Woodfall, but it was with who's that director? He won the Oscar, Tony Richardson. You don't know film as well as I'm realizing you don't know film and theater as well. Tony
yeah.
Richardson won the Oscar. That was a revolutionary film for its time because they used helicopter shots. They're taking a classic Tom Jones by
Right, yeah.
by Fielding,
Yeah.
and they're not giving it a an MGM or a Alexander Korda type of treatment because it is a comedy.
Right.
They're almost it's almost like by a Charlie Chaplin and everything.
Right.
But
It's a skit,
the
yeah.
jump cuts and all sorts of stuff, and it won Best Picture Oscar. It was the first British picture to be honored like that. If you don't consider something like because Lawrence of Arabia was that's Sam Spiegel, that's
Right,
U.S.
right,
money.
right.
And Tony Richardson won the Oscar too. Can we try Anne? No, this is the most famous scene from it at the time.
Okay, let's.
If you're there, Paul, we'll try Anne again.
Yeah, hold on one second.
Okay, but people don't understand. This was all revolutionary. The introduction of these actors, not
Yes,
just in
yes.
England, but
Right.
then when they hit the United States too. Okay.
Heroes, whatever high ideals we may have of them, are mortal, not divine. We are all as God made us, and many of us much worse.
Oh, we were talking. We thought we were talking over this, but.
I was just going to go through like his theater credits.
Well, let's finish what we're saying. This was considered very risque at the
Oh, yes,
time.
yeah.
It was a very famous scene, very naughty, and you were saying in places like England and Ireland.
It was banned.
A lot of these
It was
films were
yeah,
banned.
banned by the censor, yeah, because it was too raucous.
Well, is it Saturday night and Sunday morning? He gets his mistress, who's a married woman, pregnant, and they talk about abortion or something, which that was so controversial.
Yeah. So they wouldn't. It was amazing, And you talk about back to Ireland as well. The censorship in Ireland was
would have been much worse.
Much worse, because what's amazing to me is the great Irish writers. People like James Joyce. Dubliners. Banned.
Ulysses was banned in 1933 in the United States.
So they. Yes, I'd forgotten that. Life has changed so much, right?
But he, on stage, he was Billy Liar, which was a great working northern film, which was Tom Courtenay and Julie Christie made the breakthrough. They said, he was offered all these movies, but he just... He didn't have much ambition.
There's a list here on Wikipedia of his...
Because he won an Oscar nomination. It was a big star, and then he just virtually walked away from it.
There's a list here of his theatre credits, right? So starting in 1956, Henry V, which of course he played the title part. And then
Henry V.
Just the Party, 1958. And then Coriolanus in 1959.
Right. That's what made him a name on stage. We took over from Olivier.
Right. And then he did Luther twice in 61 and 63.
He did Luther in London and on Broadway, and he was on the cover of Newsweek in 1963. He was, poised for superstardom, and he just basically walked away from it.
At the Luntfontein Theatre, right.
He said he liked to drink, eat, and make love to all the beautiful women he made.
What's wrong with that?
And then he'd have to go to the Fat Farm to slim down before a movie.
Then in 1965, he did black comedy and Much Ado About Nothing. He did Don Pedro in Boat at the Old Vic in Much Ado About Nothing. In 1965 to 66, he did Miss Julie.
Well, he did a lot of plays afterwards. And
right.
You could have, but the interesting thing was Luther. I don't know if he won the Tony Award. Was famous, but he turned down the movie when they eventually made it years later, and he fell out with John Osborne. And he also Lindsay Anderson. He was close to. Was a great director. He turned down This Sporting Life, which made Richard Harris star, which is a great movie. I was going to have some clips of that.
Another Irish guy, right?
And but interestingly, in the 70s, he played Hamlet and was a disaster. And so was Peter O'Toole. Peter O'Toole opened the National Theatre when it became the National Theatre. The Old Vic became the National Theatre in '64. Right. And Laurence Olivier directed. It was not the greatest stage.
Peter O'Toole was so,
and he
was very he could be very self-absorbed. He was especially later in his career. I saw him being interviewed a number of times, and when he got much older, he kind of mellowed again. But there was a time when he was, we might have said too big for his boots almost, but it was about him. He was.
When you're an actor like that, and you're so singular. You think about all actors, like even Brando, and Rod Steiger was a great character actor. But suddenly you reach the top; they're giving you an Oscar, and you're in your early 40s, and suddenly you start repeating yourself.
Yeah.
And one of the best things, Brando just goes off screen.
Right.
You just repeat yourself. But some people are able to reinvent themselves later. Like Clint Eastwood became a much better actor when he was 70 years old. He wasn't much of an actor, but some actors. George C. Scott, great character actor and actor, and then you just start repeating yourself. And ironically, Peter O'Toole also bombed the Macbeth, and so did Albert Finney. His Hamlet, they're
similar
Macbeth,
in a way. I mean, they both. I mean, I remember seeing Peter O'Toole on stage, drunk as a skunk. I mean, just out of his mind.
Oh yeah, Albert liked to drink too.
And in the end, he had to be hauled off. They were playing music to get him, and he was gone off script and rambling. And
that's what they say. It's funny. That's what they say about Albert Finney. He's playing Hamlet and Macbeth, and suddenly he's making jokes and throwing everybody off.
Yeah.
They say that Burton had a problem where he'd get bored.
Yeah.
He'd get bored playing it every night. Because he really made a big mark as Hamlet in '64.
Richard Burton, right.
But, but interestingly, he was a great Tamerlane, which is very rarely played, the Marlowe play. Yeah, which I often think of that line about the earthly crown when I think about our
We don't see, I'm...
But these guys were classically trained.
Right.
Classically trained in Shakespeare and all that.
And I wonder where are those people today? I mean, there must be people out there doing it. We just don't.
But who was the great Hamlet of this generation?
I don't know.
Nicole Williamson.
Really?
Oh, when the Prime Minister, Mr. Wilson, was invited to the White House with Nixon. He was raving. Tony Richardson directed him at the Roundhouse, which was a small theater. And Nicole Williamson was like the Hamlet of that generation. So they had him come and entertain Nixon.
Wow.
And but that guy, talk about a drunk. That was a guy with that phenomenal talent, and just he'd come out of character and kick somebody behind if he didn't like you.
I was down.
He's gone now too.
I was down for the first time in many years. I was down at Coolidge Corner Theatre.
Oh,
a few months ago.
Saw Henry V with Olivier
and
there,
and that's where sort of you go to a place like that and you discover. I mean, this is more a comment on my shelteredness and sort of being busy, you know, with domesticity and kids and sort of, you know, taking kids to baseball games or football games for lots of years. And the world of theatre and etc. You know, it goes on. It's just that I'm the one who's left it, not it has left us. If you know what I mean.
Right.
Because when I was down at Coolidge Corner the other day, a few months ago now, and I'm like this world still exists. You know, there are still people going to great movies and interested in great movies, and it's not just all.
But it's a different style of acting. It's bravura. You know, where
there
you can almost hear the spittle. Nowadays, since about the year 2000, they have microphones that are so sensitive. They don't want you speaking up.
Right.
They want you to speak in almost a small voice because they can pick it up. But, you know, movie acting and theater acting are different. But then by the year 2000, I remember going to the Olivier, which is National Theatre, which is a horrible place, all concrete with a hiss and everything. It's so cavernous, they had to finally, even in England, take microphones so they could get people could hear.
And it's much, and so because someone like you talk about Barrymore earlier on, but even like Gielgud and people like that, you know,
Christopher Plummer was a great actor.
Yeah, their voice, they were sort of this avuncular, sort of, you know,
rich, plummy.
Yeah. You'd hear it like someone like what's his name, Hopkins. You know, what's his?
Anthony Hopkins is a great actor.
Still has it today. You know, it's sort of they can project that voice, so you can tell they're stage. They're stage actors, right?
That's the thing you'd learn, you know, how to project from your diaphragm.
Right.
And so you use very little power, but you learn how to use your lung and you can play. But that's what William Wyler, the great film director, told Olivier when he was Wuthering Heights. Says, this isn't, you know, I'm not in the third balcony at the opera in Manchester. You know, I'm right here.
Right, yeah.
Dial it down.
But then you have to admire people like Gielgud who were able to, like, all that subtlety and, you know, soft voice stuff that they were able to do for movies afterwards, which they never would have done on the stage, right? You would never have whispered on the stage.
Well, Gielgud was not a great stage. The best first performance is when he plays the king in Chimes at Midnight, Wells, where he's Henry IV. And he's very subtle because he's being directed by a great, not only a great actor, but a great filmmaker too. But he later developed when he was older because he didn't care about he didn't care about film, where Olivier did and didn't. But see, that's a different era too.
Right. What about Brando? Excuse my ignorance, but was Brando ever like? Was he ever on stage?
Brando was. Oh yeah, he was a great stage actor.
Was he?
They say from people that I know. Brando and Burton, you couldn't keep their eyes off him. Elia Kazan had the problem when he was Truckline Cafe, Maxwell Anderson. Even when he was just a supporting character, but he played a very key role. He murders his wife, and he has to come in at the beginning of Act 2. And they say, you know, everybody's eyes are on him, so you have to block. So he's there with the main characters speaking. And that was the problem with Richard Burton, too. They had to, when they did Camelot, you couldn't just keep him. He had to be there even when he's not speaking because everybody watches him. And I know somebody that saw him, both Brando and Burton, where they just command the stage. And there's very few actors like that, but he hated acting. He always said they wanted to give him an Oscar back in...
This is Burton, you mean?
No, well, Burton didn't like acting either. It was just he got rich so quickly after the war because he had a beautiful voice and he was handsome. And John Gielgud, you know, brought him into his company and he was an overnight success.
And he had that voice too.
But they didn't respect acting, and neither did Brando. When they were going to give him an Oscar, his good friend who was in Truckline Cafe, Carl Malden, was the head of the Academy. He says, we'd like to give you an honorary Oscar. He says, do I have to be there? He said, no, yeah. I said, forget it. Yeah. And there's the other famous story where they wanted to make him a Lear on Broadway. this could be Brando's a whole subject into itself,
Right,
because they
right.
always thought he was going to become the American Olivier,
Yeah.
and he had no interest in going on stage after. It's grueling. It's grueling.
Yeah.
And they asked him in the early '80s with Elia Kazan. Always they were trying to get him and Elia Kazan back together because he was the great stage director of his time, and. They'd offer him all the money to go on Broadway to play Lear, and he said, Georgie, they took his best friend. He said, Georgie, I only went to acting school to get laid. Which, so he had no way. They'd already done it all.
I remember him and what's her name? His wife.
Which one?
Getting married twice. Liz,
now we're back to Burton.
Yeah,
we were at Brando.
Yeah.
Oh, Elizabeth Taylor.
Elizabeth Taylor. I remember him in Taming of the Shrew.
That's what's his name? Franco Zeffirelli.
And then of course, and then the classic Cleopatra with.
He looked like he was drunk as a skunk.
At that point, it was really just about the two of them.
He couldn't act on film because he started in '52. He got an Oscar nomination in My Cousin Rachel. Then '53, a Best Actor in The Robe. But it's just because of the publicity machine. He couldn't become a star because the camera just didn't like him. But he said that Liz taught him how to act on film. So there's that brief period where if you see Night of the Iguana, he's brilliant. And The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, it's brilliant. And then, Who's Afraid of the Virginia Woolf?
Right.
But they'd always shoot him. He was always letter perfect. He'd always do just one take, rather than somebody like Brando would do 40 takes to really get into it.
But there's some commonality.
Then he lost it again. He just didn't care.
Is it just because they were British? But because there's this commonality between him, and this sort of Peter O'Toole and Albert Finney and Richard Harris and all these guys. There's some connection. There's some thread there, right? Because they're not of the Bogart and sort of the American tradition, right? I mean, but
although
there's
they
something
loved Richard Burton was his great friend in Hollywood in the early '50s was Bogey. You got to realize all those British stars like Harris didn't like Brando because they were almost contemporaries and they were in a movie together and he treated them like crap. But all the actors of Redgrave's generation and Finney, they all loved Brando. I thought he was a great actor. But Brando was supposed to become the Laurence Olivier and lead the American stage, which is always felt inferior because they import the Englishmen.
They did then anyway.
Yeah, I was supposed to go to London to see Art with Albert Finney, the play Art, and Tom Courtenay, but they said, it's coming over to Broadway, so I'd wait. And then I was told by somebody, no, they're going to have Alan Alda in it. So,
Alan Alda, there's another name. But he's much more recent.
But the union wouldn't let them come over. But then Laurence Olivier actually wanted Albert Finney to take over the National Theatre, but he didn't want to. Nobody would become what Olivier was, keeping the British theatre alive and recommitting it. Because Olivier gave him all sorts of money just to run that company. People didn't want to do it. They didn't have the commitment or... You weren't,
I wonder who's
you weren't driven.
Who's in the West End today? Because all these people. I mean, London is a mecca for there are people. You get onto Broadway in New York. You go to the West End in London, and it's.
I used to go.
But
I used to go a lot when I used to go to England. But
but who's there today?
I don't know the new generation of actors. I don't.
It's almost like, are there any? I'm sure there are. I mean, it's my ignorance maybe, but I wonder where the replacements for a Gielgud or a Burton or an O'Toole or anybody else. Where's the?
It's probably passé. Those people created a new type of acting in England, and it actually affected America.
Who inherited
too.
Like Jeremy Irons or somebody like who?
I don't know.
Hugh Grant, is that who we're left with?
Anthony Hopkins is a great stage actor
Anthony
and a great
Hopkins.
film actor, but he spends time in America, and
he's finished anyway, pretty much.
Right,
now,
he's like 80 years old now.
Right.
And I don't know.
I don't know. It's interesting. I wonder. My son is at UNH. He's actually he took film. He's doing something of it, but he just as an additional course, he took film last year, and so, which is why I ended up, he and I going down to the Coolidge Theatre and places like that, and sort of we were talking the Seventh Submarine.
Bring him
and all
on.
that stuff. We
will tackle this in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah. Are we going to finish with our poem?
We're going to do. We're going to take a breath.
Take a breath.
Breathe in.
The second.
Do we have
coming.
him? We'll just have him on camera, Paul.
All right, W.B. Yeats, The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming? Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow ties, while all about it real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? W.B. Yeats.
Yeah.
Good Irish poetry.
Happy birthday, Sergeant Rick Fury. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you, John.
Here at Ward 13, and thank you, Jim O'Connell.
Thank you very much. Good night. Wonderful.
We are all of us as God made us, and many of us much worse. Tom Jones was much, much, much worse. The whole world loves Tom Jones. The whole world loves Tom Jones. The world of excitement. The world of spectacle.
And you, sir.
The world of laughter.